Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'd, ahabati fillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakum Allah. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us all with ikhlas, with thabat ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and may Allah tabarak ta'ala forgive us of our many sins. Ameen ya rabbil alameen. Habati fillah, an interesting comment was posed, not so much a question, but I thought it was definitely worthy of addressing, as it's something I've thought about over years in relation to reaching out to particular communities and Islamic, the Islamic cause of da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Islamic call of da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the questioner, or the individual named Dawudu, so I think this is a West African name, possibly Senegal, Ghana, Gambia. Ala kulli hal, the brother states, I have looked at several of you posting, and concludes. So there's some English issues there, but that's not the point of this video. But I've looked at several postings. This is what he's trying to say. And there's nothing in those postings relevant to the development of African American Muslims. Sounding like an Arab also does not make any of you Saudi educated brothers relevant. Stay in your lane. Help your community. Maybe one day when you are old and feeble, they will help you. So it's very interesting. There's some interesting points there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and guide him, and forgive us and forgive him, and increase us in kulli khair. So I thought it was important to dissect what our brother has said and give him clarity, but others, because a lot of people have deal with some of these issues. For example, we've discussed a little bit about racism and racism in the Muslim community. There's immense amounts of racism, unfortunately, in our communities around the world, between between the various groups, as you would have with others. You know, there's racism meaning that there's a sense of superiority for people based on their race. For example, there are white Muslims who believe they are superior to black Muslims. There are Arabs who believe they are superior to non-Arabs or to darker skinned peoples and others, and they have their rankings, and tribes have their rankings. This is perhaps a disease from the shaitan that is kind of inherent to a greater or lesser extent in the children of Adam. And it is something that all of us, in whatever way we are infected with racism, that we should deal with it. And so racism, we're talking, so that way we have a list of terms. We're referring to the concept of superiority, meaning that you believe you're superior to another race of people or another group of people, versus the concept of prejudice, which might be more in line with a kind of a preference. So, for example, if someone says, maybe he's an African American male, and he says, I prefer to marry within, an African American female, for example, or a Russian male who says, I prefer to marry a Russian female. That's his preference. It's not necessarily due to racism and the concept of believing you are superior. So that's one of the things kind of inherent in the concept of racism, in that there's a sense of superiority. And that's relevant to our discussion because our brother was talking about the development of African American Muslims. First, I want to say, I don't know if he's even African American, so what he has to contribute to that discussion may not be from firsthand experience. Maybe he cannot contribute anything valid for African Americans or African American Muslims, but perhaps he's African American. It really doesn't matter to me. But I think it's important to look at some of the things he says. So one thing we have to realize that when it talks to serving the Muslim community, Muslims, that we are ordered to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're not ordered to worship Allah tabarak wa ta'ala based on race. As we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, mentions that we are created in nations and tribes in order to know one another. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, I mean, there's many hadith about racism and talking about the arrogance. And we know that this was the concept of racism, meaning that superiority complex is based in arrogance. And we know that Iblis, the shaitan, was asked to prostrate to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَسَجِدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ فَأَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. That Iblis, the Malaika were ordered to prostrate, and they prostrated, but Iblis did not. And of course, he's a jinn. فَأَبَى, he refused. He refused to prostrate to Adam. وَاسْتَكْبَرَ, and he became arrogant, and he was one of the disbelievers. So this is the wajh that you see. There's a relationship between disbelief and arrogance and racism, because racism is based on a type of arrogance. When you sit there, you say, I am better. My people are better than others based on our race, based on our tribe. This is tribalism. But the racism, this is a concept of, this is arrogance, because no one is better based on their race. When you die as an African American, you go on the ground, you dissipate. When you die as a white American, you go on the ground, you dissipate. When you go on the ground as a Russian, you die and you dissipate. And when you go as a Chinese, you go on the ground and it's a done deal. It's not going to, your race is not going to benefit you. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, قال, إن الله لا ينظر إلى أجسادكم ولا إلى صوركم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. Verily, Allah does not look to your shape or your characteristics, your traits, meaning your traits, your physical traits. ولكن, however, He looks to your hearts and your deeds. هذا هو. So it's not necessarily that there is a hadaf, a pure goal that you have to restrict your dawah to a people. Now, no doubt, if you come from a particular community, so again, if you come from a particular people, you're going to know that culture, perhaps, okay? If you are raised in a particular culture, for example, a poor African-American community, or a rich African-American community. Because again, even when you talk about African-American, there's so much diversity as far as social class. Wealthy African and well-educated African-Americans are not like poor in the trenches in the hood African-Americans, nor are whites that are poor in white social class, if you will. Can they identify with, what's the girl who owns the hotels? I forgot her name. The Hilton hotels, the daughter. So no, they don't relate, because they're in total different social circles, even though their race is similar. They group together based on social class and wealth. Okay, so it's very important. Those blanket statements as far as serving this one and serving that one can be problematic. Secondly, dawah is for everyone. So if you have a way to reach people, for example, I couldn't probably go to Pakistan, even if I knew Urdu, and be as effective as someone from that community. That's probably a fair judgment. If I knew Pushtu and I went to places in Afghanistan that speak Pushtu, because not all of Afghanistan, they have other language groups. I might not be able to identify with them. Even if I knew the language, if I studied the language, I wouldn't know their customs. I wouldn't know even maybe the grammatical way of reaching them. So there's no doubt that when someone comes from a particular people, and as the Prophet ﷺ began with his tribe, in his region, that is a very important sunnah, if you will, because you want to be able, the people need to be able to relate to you. If you cannot relate to those people, you do not know. That's a part of the fiqh dawah. It's part of the understanding of how to reach people. If you have some similarities, doesn't mean necessarily you have to have the same race, but generally you do need the same, strong competence in the language. You need to be able, they need to be able to identify with you in some way. So there's no problem with that. But to restrict yourself is where we have some issues. Another point that I want to mention to our brother Dawudu is that although this is beautiful to reach those communities, where I live and where I am is far away from those communities. So the people that I reach when I am doing dawah, because it's basically through social media at this point, then they're going to be whoever listens, whoever finds relevance, whoever is interested in those topics. And speaking about Tawheed, which all Muslims should be interested into, but not everyone's interested in that. Some people, they like controversy. Some people, they want more racial themes or themes about cultural issues, and they want this and they want that. But really, the dawah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which I'm more concerned about than a cultural acceptance of this one or that one, is a dawah, as our Sheikh said, min kitabillah ila kitabillah wa min sunnati Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam ila sunnati Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So it's from the dawah of Ahl Sunnah, because that's a higher ascription than being a white American, African American, white British, white UKian, Chinese British, whatever you identify with, Chinese Canadian. The higher identification is that to be Muslim and to be from Ahl Sunnah. Hada akbar wa aqwa. It's much stronger and it's much bigger and better, because these are the ways to please Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alameen. Verily my life, my death, my sacrifice, to the end of the ayat, is to Allah, the Rabbil Alameen. Okay? Everything is about Islam and is about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not confined by cultural restraints. Now, I understand what you're saying. Some of the points you're making sounded like an Arab. I do use a lot of Arabic because that's how I keep my Arabic. And it's very important. If you're educated in something, you snooze or you lose. So you do need to use it and have mumarasa in your studies. You need to continue in your studies. So I will not refrain from that, even if I was talking to African Americans. Another point is staying in your lane. I'm not exactly sure what Dawudu means by that. May Allah forgive us in him and guide us in him. And that you'll need the help of your community. The community doesn't help me now. They hardly ever did, even as a new Muslim operating with people. So unfortunately, you'll find that your true community, a lot of times, it's based on those people who love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most. It's based on taqwa, because that's what is relevant to Allah. That's the aqwa. That's the strongest relationship, because you could go into a community of people like you, even though they're Muslim. They look like you, they sound like you, whatever the case may be. You identify with some of the things together, but that is not success. It doesn't mean that they're going to be successful or that they're going to help bring you up. In fact, unfortunately, because of our own cultural lack of development, in some sense, not that we don't lack a culture. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, because of the history, especially as you're talking about African American, we have a history of great turmoil, as well as progress, as well as struggle, as well as people who achieved and people that were leaders. But the masses are not like that. That's just the reality with almost any people. So your identification, you're restricting yourself to particular people when it comes to the dawah and the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not going to make you successful. Your success, again, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks to the hearts and the actions, this is where it is. It's going to be with taqwa. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ladina amanu wa taqullah. Oh, you who believe, fear Allah. Haqqa tuqati. As much as you can. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Don't die except in a state of Islam or as Muslims. Allah didn't say fear Allah and die only as a European Anglo-Saxon. Die as a Viking. Die as this. Die as that. No. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Die as a Muslim. You want to be buried as a Muslim by whoever Muslims, by Muslims. You want to be buried, and you want to be buried with, and you want to have that identification, and most importantly, the heart that is attached to Islam. So that's why I'd say it's very important to be cautious. I do understand. I know the problems of, I was born African American. I'll die African American. I'm African American. That's who I am racially. If you want to make that identification, that is that. I know the struggle of my race, my people in that sense, as far as race and this and that and the other. But the highest level and the best that you can offer, for example, a black family, a white family, is to raise your children and to offer the example and share the message of Islam, share the message of the truth, and walk in light of that, setting the example, fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being a source of good, not a source of evil in that community. So I don't know exactly what Dawudu is exactly talking about. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us in him, guides us in him, and gives us all jihaad, and blesses us to open our mind Islamically. Blesses us to open our mind and our hearts Islamically, so we come closer to Allah, so we can meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Iman, not by a cultural restraint. I don't want to, my goal is not to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an Arab. I'll never be an Arab. My goal is not to be a Afghani, because I'll never be Afghani. It's not in my blood. It's not in my, I could go there and assimilate to their traditions and so forth. But the point is that La tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. Don't die except in a state of Islam, because that's your success. So I don't know if this is something that will hopefully give our brother a little bit of insight, and if not, at least I gave him a response, because what he is saying, it has some relevance, because there are some people who somewhat restrict their dawah like that they feel, and there's nothing wrong with going to your people, as the prophets, alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, went to their people from their tribes in their nations, and that's where they called. But the Prophet ﷺ was the kulun nas. He was the nas jami'an, nas ajma'in, all of mankind, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's really why we should not restrict our dawah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil. If there's any questions somewhat relevant to the topic, then inshallah ta'ala we'll try our best to deal with them. And if not, then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and guide us. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have a question. I understand Allah forgives all sins, but I'm a bit fearful that there will be people on the day of judgment waiting for their rights. Is there any hope even for that? So fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as you can. Do as many good deeds and make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And make sure you don't oppress people and you return the rights. If you have violated people's rights, try to seek their forgiveness and their pardon, as well as the forgiveness and pardon of Allah, which is obviously not the same way, but you want the forgiveness from the people as well if you violated their rights. And that's why the scholars mention, like Imam Nawawi and other than him, about when it has to do with the haqq of a person, that the tawbah of that is that you return. For example, if you stole something from someone and you make tawbah to Allah, that what is a condition of that tawbah is that you also return the item. If I stole this pencil from someone and now I feel sorrow and I'm determined not to return to that sin and so forth, part of my tawbah would be to return this item to the individual I stole from. So That's what I can say in regards to that, is do your best to return the rights of people and not to violate the rights of people. Wallahu musta'an. May Allah forgive us all for our many sins and shortcomings. Ameen. 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 Can we, for example, go to Hajj, get the 100,000 reward for one prayer, and just have those rewards reserved for people in case they complain to Allah? You're not going to lose by doing extra worship and making Hajj. If you made Hajj and you've made it, this is like Nawafil, it's extra Hajj for you, then of course this is, you increase your deeds anyway. That's with anything, in order to have more good deeds, and especially if you violated the rights of people and you harmed people. Wallahu musta'an. Is there so much evil in the West? Oh, there's so much evil in the West. There's so much evil in the world. So it's not just the West. The West can just be a leader sometimes in some of those evil movements and ideologies. But unfortunately, it's everywhere. It's around the world. And places tafawut and people tafawut. That meaning they have different levels of evil and sinfulness. And sin is more widespread in some places than others. And generally, in the Muslim lands, you will have generally a much greater good, because you're at least hopefully hearing the adhan, having the prayer established to a greater or lesser extent. So there are the signs of Islam, a Muslim leader. You have many positives, and it depends on the land. They differ in their levels of khair and levels in adherence to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So places different, people differ, and people differ. And this is why, when talking about the concept of hijrah, from one place to another, from the land of disbelief to the land of belief, or the land of bid'ah to the land of sunnah, or the land of shirk to the land of tawheed, that the scholars mention those various nuances, or those various ways of making hijrah. That maybe you're in a Muslim land and you want to go to a more adherent Muslim land. And generally, the Muslim lands at least have, even if they have a lot of sins, and certain places have many sins, more than others, but that they usually have some other good that you don't find in non-Muslim lands as a Muslim minority, that you struggle more in general to practice your deen, and maybe are in a situation where you don't have to compromise certain aspects of your deen. You're less likely to, and that depends on the place and the time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So now the world has plenty of evil. That's why it's important to cling to the sunnah, and cling to the people of the sunnah, and cling to the Muslim leader, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the hadith of Hudayfa bin Yaman radiyallahu ta'ala an, and be the jama'ah, be with Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, or be from Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and may Allah bless us to be from them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. I feel like there's like a coward. My family, my mother and sister are with makeup and uncover. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. Is it okay for me to go out with them? I'm 14. Yeah, it's not a problem, and you can. I don't know if your family is Muslim or not, but you're really not in a position to really be able to do much more than that, than except for advise them if you can. But you're at a very young age, and probably fairly powerless in that sense. So if someone wants to ask a question, but he doesn't want to ask a stupid question or annoy, make angry the Ustaz Sheikh, so he refrains from asking even though he really wants an answer. I don't know what the question is after all of that. But anyhow, ask some of the adab, the manners of asking questions, is that a person should ask questions that are relevant to their real life scenario. So one of the things the scholars mention is not asking about stuff, and the Salaf used to dislike people who ask about things that never happened. For example, if someone says, well, if the moon comes down now and, Fajr is at such and such, how do I pray? Okay, so, asking these questions which are like just hypothetical questions. So the scholars don't like that. The Salaf didn't like that. Um, and asking questions, making sure you ask questions which are relevant to you in your life and your understanding of Islam. So not to be over. Also, another part of asking questions, aside from asking relevant questions that you may need to know answers about, but asking questions um, that don't ask too many questions, meaning questions that they're relevant or there are nitpicky kind of questions. And that's a very general way of trying to describe it. But sometimes we know it's almost common sense, or things in order to make things hard for others. For example, maybe there's a new game, okay, or something that people do, and it's really common and widespread. And there are people of knowledge who might do it. I don't know, something. I'm just trying to think of something. But sometimes people ask questions to make something haram, to try to get an answer, to make it hard on other people, and also to show themselves. And I know a lot of us going overseas, in our more youthful phases, when we start to learn a little Arabic and we can ask the sheikh questions, those are sometimes the questions that we like to ask, like, let me ask the sheikh about this, it may not be something that we really need to go into, that, there's nothing that is clearly haram, or, it's not really a problem, but it can easily be made a problem and a hardship for the people back in that locality. So asking questions to try to get things, to get an answer or a fatwa saying something is haram, that this is also something which is not liked. And those are some of the things, as far as I can think of, as far as some adab, some manners of a question. Also, questions about things which are not useful, in the sense, like, for example, excessive asking about other people, especially if it's already affirmed that this person maybe is a person of the Sunnah. So, for example, the people who they ask constantly, or they test people with their asking. What's your position on Yahya Hajuri? What's your position on Sheikh Muqbil? What's your position on Sheikh Rabi'? What's your position on Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi? What's your position on Ibrahim Rahili? In order to get an answer, to label you, to push you in a box. What's your position on Sheikh Ali Al-Halabi? Ali Hassan al-Ma'rabi, or Sheikh Salih Suhaimi, or Imam Fawzan? What's your position? What's your mawqif? What's your position on the greatest fitna and the latest fitna? So those are also questions which are also disliked, questions of fitna. Now, if it's something that a person really needs to know, and what did I say? I said really needs to know. I didn't say just that they want to know, but they really need to know. It's really relevant for them. Then that's something different, because they're afraid of bid'ah, they're afraid of this. Then they want to know about a da'i, or someone, or a scholar that they listen to, or whatever, or they've heard something about. If it's actually something relevant for their life, but just to get in for the sake of getting in fitna, or to test people and cause fitna, then this is also something which is disliked as a type of question, and sort of a violation of good manners of asking questions. When will you go through other treatises, something like diseases of the heart, barakallah fik? Inshallah, I don't know how soon I'll be able to, but I hope to do something, and I want to do some series. I was asked to do some things about something for a Quran series in uh, through Facebook, a Facebook group. So I'll do some things for them. I'll post it here and then just send it to their group. But inshallah ta'ala, I'll be getting into some things when I have the time and I have hopefully access to my books. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. How important is it to be able to pronounce Arabic letters, how they are supposed to be pronounced when reciting the Quran? Many people pronounce the Ba to Za or Ain to Alif. Yeah, it's very important. It's very important. The makharij al-huruf, the places where the huruf, to know the places of the tongue on how to pronounce. So all of us need to, even Arabs, they need to work on that and work on tajweed. So basically, by being competent and reading the Quran, because that's the most serious thing, that's the most important thing, is for your recitation of the Quran, to make sure you're not changing the meaning or your prayer and, distorting the meaning of the prayer or destroying, of the Quran in the prayer, something. A person must know how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha properly. Now, there are different levels of mistakes. There's mistakes that are distort and change the meaning. There are some mistakes that don't, they're mistakes, but they are, those are the two levels of mistakes. They talk about a lahan and also, I forgot the other mistake they refer to when talking about in tajweed. But when there's a very serious khata, mistake that changes the meaning, that's so it's very important to be able to recite Surah Al-Fatiha properly. Doesn't mean it has to be beautiful recitation, it has to be this, it has to be that, but just that you're proper, the words are being properly pronounced. Now, there are some cultures, because they don't have, for example, you'll find a lot of times some or many Pakistanis have problems with certain pronouncing certain letters. So as you said, the za, and you'll even find Arabs, because of their dialect. For example, you'll find sometimes Egyptians that are and others, Sudanese and stuff and so forth, especially if they're not educated in recitation or they're just not educated with their Arabic. They speak and they just use their regular dialect, the Ammiya, the general dialect that the people speak, and their accents. So then they do that. Most of the Arab countries, they have that. They have it in one way or another. You'll find in Yemen they do sometimes the ghaf instead of qaf, they'll say ghaf, and and stuff like this. You'll find that in many, probably all the Arab countries. From amongst, they'll have their own things because of their local dialects and so forth. So it's important, especially not to, so it doesn't change the meaning, to try your best. Now, some people, they literally maybe can't. There are situations, so they just do as much, the best of their ability, and they'll be rewarded for that. And if they are someone who, is a non-Arab and they are struggling with the Arabic and the recitation of Quran, their reward is double, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. So you'll always be rewarded for striving to correct and perfect your pronunciation. And all of us, we make those mistakes. A lot of us, especially as non-Arabs, as it being our second language, it depends on how well you studied, how competent you are, and how much you keep active in revising and using the Arabic language. But I know I make mistakes. Certain letters are harder for me to pronounce, so I have to make an extra effort, and that's because it's I have the lahja amrikiya. I have the American dialect when speaking Arabic sometimes. So, Allah understand. So there might be a type of laziness sometimes if I'm not being very active. So those are things that are you can work on. You just strive your best to do your best. That's all you can do. Do the best you can. If I look at someone good looking, how can we say, oh, Allah bless him? You can say exactly that. Barak Allahumma barak lahu, or something like this. What is the ruling of some of our sisters putting themselves in niqab in their online profile pictures or post? I mean, I'm not sure. Is that a yes, it's relevant, but again, you don't want to display your beauty if someone's doing that. So yeah, we know a lot of sisters, they have their Facebook profile, and some of them that are even religious, they'll put their profile and they'll have niqab or something like this. Still, it's probably better that they're not displaying. It's not necessarily for them to display themselves, even though they're wearing hijab and so forth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, to be out there. You could put something else, a flower, whatever you want to put out there. That's good. Is it obligatory to give dawah to Muslims that are much older than you while being really young? Is it, if it's not even about age, but if you have the ability to share something of knowledge to someone, regardless of their age, regardless of their level of knowledge, then you can share, you can remind and share, that the reminder benefits the believer. So there's no necessary restriction. If you see a wrong and it's amongst an elder, you can share with them in a very respectful and kind way, if inshallah ta'ala, if you have the ability to do so. Now, what do the ulama mention regarding speaking slang, saying cuss words? I find myself speaking lots of slang. The main thing is the cuss words. Do not use foul language. So that's the whole point. You speak in the language of the people around you that they understand, in order to relate to them or give them dawah or what have you. Inshallah ta'ala, there's no problem with that. The issue is if you are swearing and using foul language. So that you don't, it's not permissible to use. Allah understand. I'm highly offended. We ask Allah Ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil. Bless us with ikhlas, with thabat ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.